Hello, and thank you for joining me as we explore the layers behind a tragic car accident that occurred along the interstate near downtown Des Moines on September 11th, 2008. Amidst the wreckage on that exit ramp during the surge of afternoon traffic lay Michele's lifeless body. Her time on this earth ended when she was only 41 years old. Michele left behind a husband, 3 children, her first grandchild, and a second grandson who she would never get to meet. Among the mayhem, dark secrets waited to be uncovered. Far from a tragic, yet simple car accident, Michele's death would soon look a whole lot like murder. But why would anyone want to kill Michele? Was it for money? Revenge? A random act of violence? To answer that question, we must turn to Michele's husband, Randy Davis. From the first day I met Michele, I knew she was one firecracker of a woman. She was always energetic and up for an adventure, especially if she could ride her motorcycle to wherever her free spirit was leading her. Even though she worked with some tough guys as an administrator for a trucking company, Michele had no trouble holding her own. Everyone respected her and wanted to be near her. What type of guy wouldn't fall in love with a woman like that? She was a rare one. On September 11th, 2008, my wife, Michele, was the only thing on my mind as I drove my red Ford pickup truck down the interstate near Des Moines, Iowa. We had been married for 17 years by then, almost 2 decades. That's a long time for any relationship to last. So, of course, things weren't perfect. Everyone nowadays expects marriage to be some type of fairy tale. Real life isn't like that. Real marriages take work, forgiveness, and compromises. I guess I was driving a little crazy that day. Switching between lanes. I was overwhelmed, and my life was about to get a whole lot more stressful. I was already back home by the time the news broke. A car had veered off the road, suddenly jerking out of the driver's control on Interstate 235. The vehicle collided with a wall and a pole, then flipped over, landing upside down and almost crushing the driver. From what I've heard, it wasn't a pretty sight. 5 vehicles were involved in the crash off the exit that September day. One driver, the one responsible for the accident, didn't make it out alive. The driver who lost their life was Michele Davis, my wife. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning thinking they're going to die in a car crash. I'm sure Michele didn't. On the day of our wedding, I wasn't thinking that our marriage would end in an awful collision either. But that's what the police said happened. Michele had died in a fatal car accident. Tragic, but people die in car accidents all the time. As her husband, my heart was broken. People who didn't know her probably didn't think much of it. That is, until the investigators got a hold of the autopsy report. The report answered the question of how an experienced driver like Michele had lost control of her car that day. A bullet was found in her head, one from a .22 caliber rifle to be exact. They say that the gunshot killed her before the accident could. Michele was long gone by the time her car collided with that wall. It didn't take a genius to know that this was no longer a case of a simple car accident. Michele had been murdered. The officers didn't waste any time in getting started on their investigation. I didn't have time to deal with all that. My wife had died. That changes a man. I like to think of myself as a reasonable guy, never driven by emotion. I cried when I saw my wife at that visitation, though. Broke down as I leaned against my friend Polly's shoulder for support. On the day that Michele and I were supposed to be signing divorce papers to dissolve our marriage, I attended her funeral instead. I'd be lying if I said that mourning my wife wasn't easier than accepting the death of our marriage. Maybe that's what got me into trouble in the end. At first, everyone worried that the shooter was some random person killing people for the fun of it. Then, the police officer speculated that maybe Michele's boyfriend, Matt Jorgensen, had killed her. In a way, he did. If he hadn't stepped into the picture, who knows what would have happened? Maybe Michele would still be alive today and married to me instead. Once they ruled Matt out as a suspect, it was my turn to feel the heat. I guess Michele's family told the investigators that our marriage was turbulent. A witness came forward to claim that they saw a red pickup truck that day that had been driving erratically. The investigators got a hold of CCTV footage to back it up. I own a red truck. For some reason, the officers were torn between thinking either me or my son Josh Davis shot Michele. I don't know where they got that from. Maybe it was because Josh was her stepson, not blood related, or the fact that he was trained in how to use a gun. They brought us both in for questioning. I stuck with my story, insisting that I had gone straight home after work that day and stayed at the house for the rest of the day with my son. They wouldn't stop pestering me. So, I got my lawyer in there and refused to answer any more of their foolish questions. Josh matched my story, so the police had nothing. I thought everything was good to go. I could finally get on with letting go of Michele and moving on with my life. That is, until the police showed up at my door to arrest me. Turns out my son wasn't as loyal as I raised him to be. I don't know what went wrong in that kid's head. Like I said, the police had nothing until Josh showed up at the police station for no good reason. He admitted that he lied to them before about me staying home all night. Josh said that he watched me grab a rifle before driving off in my red pickup truck. He claimed that I told him I killed Michele later that day. Shows how stupid I was, don't it? Thinking I could trust my own flesh and blood. By then, I knew the gig was up. I mean, I tried to deny it at first. I was so sure I had gotten away with killing the woman who betrayed me. With my own son willing to testify against me, though, I knew I was doomed. You can't tell me that it was all my fault, though. We may have said our vows 17 years before Michele's death, but there's no time limit on them. Till death do us part. Those are words that I took seriously. Michele broke her promise long before I was forced to take matters into my own hands. Sure, we had gotten into our fair share of fights, but I wanted to work through it. I didn't want to end up alone again. Michele refused to see my side. She moved out in April, 5 months before her death. I gave her 5 months to come to her senses. Instead, she did everything she could to lock me out of her life forever. She told all sorts of lies about me, using my supposed history of domestic abuse and violence to get a restraining order out on me. It was all far-fetched nonsense, disagreements blown out of proportion. Everyone believed her. Can you imagine how that would make a man feel? My own wife wanted the law to step in and keep me away from her. She wanted nothing to do with me. Her father, Michael Cosner, said I was a hot-tempered guy. Well, don't you think that serving someone with a restraining order would bring out the temper in anyone? Then, to top it all off, she started dating that Matt. We weren't even divorced yet. She was still my wife while she was openly sleeping with another man. Apparently the world didn't see a problem with that. I did, of course. She couldn't really think that she could be so disrespectful to me, making a fool out of me without facing any consequences for it. If I could go back, I would have dealt with things differently. It's not like I planned it, but it was just too much for any guy to handle. Thoughts of Michele got louder and louder that day. I couldn't stand it. I had to do something. So, I grabbed my rifle and got in my truck. Love makes you do crazy things sometimes. I loved Michele so much that I couldn't let her go. If she refused to be with me, then... Anyway, I had to face the fact that I could get life in prison if I was found guilty of the first-degree murder charge hanging over my head. I'd have to go through a long trial, deal with all that nonsense. I was just shy of 55 years old at the time. I didn't have the energy for that. So, I agreed to a plea deal and pled guilty to second-degree murder. In 2010, I was sentenced to 50 years in prison. I've been stuck in the Anamosa State Penitentiary ever since. It's not how I thought I'd spend my time as I got closer to retirement. But hey, at least I know that Michele's not off living her life with that idiot Matt Jorgensen. I'll die a widower instead of a divorced man. Michele will always be referred to by my last name, long after her last blood-soaked breath. People get married for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's love, sometimes money, security, a desperate fear of loneliness. But romance can all too often shift into uncontrollable mayhem. Would you be able to tell if your spouse secretly harbored murderous intentions? I hope you'll join me again for the next video, as we try to untangle the complex layers concealing the truth by listening to the accused point of view.